Schnibbelt.
Hello, how are you guys doing today? This week I'm doing yet another redraw, and I didn't really think about that when I was actually redrawing it, but when I was thinking about doing the voiceover, I was like, wait a minute, just how many redraws have I been doing lately? Like, am I running out of ideas? Maybe. This week, my redraw is something from 4 years ago. It's Em and Amy. It's one of those couple pictures. I thought it was a really cute picture, and I actually had a great time redrawing it. I love how the new one came out. See, because the one from 4 years ago, it doesn't, it doesn't look good, but the thing is I didn't try on it that hard. But I can still tell there's parts of it where it's like, oh yeah, I thought that looked okay, but obviously it's not the hand. Like, Amy's hand, one of her hands, man, I'm like, oh, that's not good. The one that's, like, touching M's face. I still am very surprised just how far I've come in 4 years for, like, even though I didn't put a lot of effort into it, there's parts where I'm like, I remember this was sort of my style, where I didn't put much effort into this. And even now, I did put a good amount of effort into this redraw. At the same time, I wanted to not spend too long on it, so I didn't do, like, this drawing as a painting like I sometimes do. I kept to the line art basically. But I really like how it came out, so it's all good. Oh yeah, so since I drew Emamy for this week's Draw and Talk, I decided that I would talk about the two characters and their history together. If you're not familiar with these characters, you wouldn't know, but these two are some of my main characters that I have of just, like, any of my things. Like, I've had these characters a long time, 10 years. So they first started out as, like, superheroes. They didn't have much of a relationship when I first designed them. The only thing that I remember significant was Amy would get mad at Em and Jaden that they would play video games, and Amy just has this thing against video games and electronics. I don't know why, I just decided that this girl who loves to read just hates computers and technology and TV and stuff. Honestly, Jaden and Em had more of a relationship back then than Amy did with either of them, but it wasn't really anything more than they were friends who would sort of, I guess, bicker? It's kind of hard to explain. Back then, they were both kind of dimmer. Jaden back then was not how she is now. Like, she's really cutesy now, but back when I first designed her, she was very much like... She kind of acted like Naruto, actually. Kind of silly, would play pranks on people. Yeah, she was basically Naruto, and Em was basically Sasuke, if I think about it that way, but back when I made them, I would say actually that Em was more like a combination of Raven and Terra from Teen Titans, and I say that because Em had Earth powers, so that would be Terra, and then had an attitude a lot like Raven's, so... Yeah, and then Amy, basically, I guess you could say Amy kind of acted like Katara from Avatar, just less outgoing, because she was still shy back in the day. She was very shy, but she would also, I don't know, she was sort of a know-it-all. That's how they were back then. Fast forward like 2 years, and I did some different ideas with the group. Like, I did a Magical Girl series, and at the time, I separated Em from the main group, so it was just Jaden and Amy, and actually they had more of a thing going on back then, but I scrapped that whole idea pretty quick. Fast forward a little bit more time, I don't know why, I took a bunch of my Jaden Unshaken characters that were made back then, and I made this slice of life story for them. Because of how I was raised, which was religiously, and that my family knew of my YouTube account back then, I actually ended up changing Em from cis female to cis male. And I even remember getting a comment about it where it's like, why'd you change M from female to male? Like, what's the problem with having Amy and M as a couple if they're both female? And I remember I would like respond to those things like, yeah, my family, they're really not for that sort of thing. I wish that I had just kept it and done it and just made a new account at the time and it would have been fine, been all secret with it, and then, I don't know, but the point is, it was a slice of life story. Em and Amy were neighbors, and Em was cis male at the time. And even back then, okay, so basically, how their coupling has always worked was that Em liked Amy. Amy has never been pursuing Em. It's always Em liking Amy, even from the beginning of me thinking of them as a possible couple. I'm not sure why, but back then, I could never force Amy to like Em. I would draw, like, sort of cutesy pictures of them together, but I could never, like, in story, make her like him. And I never really felt like I knew why. But I feel like nowadays, it was like my past self telling myself, being like, Amy just doesn't like guys, okay? She just doesn't. Like, stop doing this. Which I've just always found interesting, like, because I didn't understand couples that weren't straight back when I was younger, because, again, I was born in a religious family. I was barely even told that it existed. I didn't even know it was possible until I saw it on TV, and I was just so confused, and of course, nowadays, I am way, way, way different, but back then I didn't really know too much about it. Oh, actually, I forgot to mention, before I did the Slice of Life story, it was a cafe story, but I had some comic pages on it, and I remember that Amy met M because he was at the cash register at this cafe. The manager of that cafe was very, very, very interesting, personality-wise, and so M back then was made to wear the cafe uniform in dress form, but he was still male, and I don't know why I did that. I believed even then that it was just pretty normal. I remember I was confronted about it, and I sort of had to, like, kind of lie and be like, it's funny. Like, I even then knew, like, it wasn't funny. It just happened. Because that person who confronted me was, like, sort of important to my being safe at home, I would just be like, it was because it's funny. It was why M's in a dress. It's because it's funny. I knew even then it wasn't because it was funny. It was just like, well, M's beautiful. He can wear a dress. And I remember when Amy first met M, again, he was at the cash register, and I remember she was like looking for an application. I remember specifically from the comic she noted that, oh, this person, I can't tell if they're a girl or a boy, but they have beautiful eyes. And I don't know, like, how old was I? I was like 14. It was so long ago. I don't know, I might have been 13. It's just fun for me to remember back on. I'm like, I know it sounds weird, but I'm like telling myself, like, good job, Shayna. You were nice about this subject, even when you didn't understand anything about it. It's great nowadays, like, people have so many ways of learning about LGBTQIA things. But back then, I didn't know it existed, I didn't know how it worked, I just didn't know much of anything. I was very uninformed for multiple reasons. But anyway, so after that cafe story, it was the slice of life story where they lived next to each other. And that was the one where M was really, really, really liked Amy. Because in the cafe one, M liked Amy, but it wasn't, I don't know how to explain it. It wasn't as strong as when he was living next to her. Anyway, so that story panned out. Like, I had that slice of life story for like a few years, maybe 3, and I always knew that Amy would never actually get with M. I remember the end of the story was supposed to end off with Amy moving away from the house next to M, and M finally like, okay, she's moving away forever. And at the time, cell phones weren't really that useful, so I was always thinking like, after this, they're probably not gonna see each other much or ever again. And so my idea of the story was M would finally confess to Amy at the end as she's about to drive away, and she would just say sorry and leave. Yeah, so anyway, after that whole thing, I finally, after years, changed M back to being cis female, but even then I was not so sure. I turned it back into a superpower-based show. Basically, the relationship has stayed where it's like Amy's super oblivious, Em really likes her, and gender stuff has evolved as I've learned more about it and felt more on how they would be through the years. It's still always been Em likes Amy a lot, Amy's oblivious, but I do believe Amy does develop feelings, it's just not right away. And that's how it's just always gonna be with these two. Em just caring a lot, doing a lot for Amy, and Amy not really realizing it. That's just how it is. Anyway, so I talked a really long time. I'm gonna have to edit so much of this out. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you liked hearing about this couple. I really enjoyed talking about it. Have a lovely day, and bye-bye!